Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. When my husband died, I thought the worst part would be the silence. I was wrong. The silence I could have handled. What I wasn't prepared for was hearing laughter coming from the other side of my locked front door and realizing it wasn't mine anymore. This isn't just a story about grief. It's about betrayal, right when you're too broken to fight back. It's about standing up when the world expects you to fall. And it's about a woman who lost everything, but found a strength she didn't know she had. Because sometimes when people try to erase you, they end up writing your comeback instead. My name is Maya Walker. I'm 34 years old, and just 2 weeks ago, I buried the man I built my life around. Aiden was my partner, my best friend, my safe place. He died too soon, suddenly, from a heart attack that none of us saw coming. I stayed at the hospital for 2 nights holding his hand, whispering prayers into the dark that never got answered. By the time I came home, I was hollow. No makeup, no sleep, just an overnight bag and a bouquet of dying hospital flowers clutched in one hand. My fingers trembled as I reached for the house key, the same one I'd used every single day for 4 years, but it wouldn't turn. First, I thought it was the grief. My hands, my nerves, maybe I just needed to breathe. But the second key didn't work either. And when I looked through the front window, my breath caught in sight. There were boxes, laughter, pink velvet cushions that weren't mine. And there, sipping tea from my favorite mug, was my mother-in-law. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just lost Aiden. I was about to lose everything else too, unless I fought harder than I ever had before. Grief doesn't come softly. It doesn't knock or wait its turn. It barges in, unannounced, uninvited, and it never comes alone. The day after Aiden died, I came home with nothing but an overnight bag and a bouquet of wilted hospital flowers. He'd had a heart attack, out of nowhere. 36, 1 minute. We were talking about what movie to stream over dinner. The next, I was holding his hand in the ICU, whispering his name like it might pull him back. Didn't. So there I was, less than 24 hours later, standing on our front porch. No makeup, unwashed hair, clothes wrinkled from 2 nights in a hospital chair. I looked like someone who'd lost everything. 'Cause I had. I reached into my bag for my keys, same set I'd used every single day for the last 4 years. I slipped one into the lock, turned it, nothing. My hand paused. I tried again, slower this time. Still nothing. I pulled out the spare. Same result. First, I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I was using the wrong key. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight. But I knew better. That's when I looked up and froze. Through the living room window, I saw boxes, cushions I didn't recognize, a vase I'd never bought, and laughter. I stepped closer, pressing my face to the glass, heart pounding. Inside were 2 women, Nina, Aiden's mother, and Zara, his older sister. They were laughing, unpacking like it was move-in day. Nina was sipping tea from the Christmas mug Aiden gave me, our first holiday together. Zara had a stack of our photo albums, flipping through them like they were clearance finds at a garage sale. I knocked on the door. Lightly at first, no response. I knocked again, louder, then a 3rd time. Finally, the door cracked open. Nina stood there like nothing was out of place. Arms folded, posture casual, wearing one of those little half smiles that tells you someone thinks they're in control. "Maya," she said like we were catching up over lunch. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Blink. Why? Why can't I open the door? What's going on? She leaned against the doorframe, her expression calm, almost amused. "Because you don't live here anymore." Her words landed like ice water down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "Yes. This is our home. Aiden and I bought it together." Nina tilted her head and gave a little shrug. "Oh, honey, you married him without a prenup. You don't have a job, no kids. Everything in this house came from Aiden. Now that he's gone, it belongs to his real family. Real family, like I was just some phase. A guest who overstayed her welcome." And then Zara appeared behind her, smirking like this was all one big joke. "You left the door unlocked when you rushed to the hospital," she said. "We just moved in." It was surreal. Like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. Only this one had my name on the mailbox. But even as my stomach turned, something inside me clicked. You see, people think grief makes you weak. But sometimes grief peels away everything that doesn't matter, and what's left is steel. I straightened my back. "You really think this house belongs to you?" I asked, voice quiet but steady. Nina didn't flinch, so I stepped forward. "No," I said. "This house is mine." Nina's eyes narrowed. "Aiden paid for it." "Not for the last 2 years," I replied. I could see the confusion on her face, that small crack of doubt. "When Aiden's credit was destroyed because of those failed investments you talked him into, I refinanced the mortgage. My name. Every payment since then has come from my account. Every tax bill, repair, insurance renewal. I covered it. Aiden was recovering. And I held this place together." Nina's expression hardened. Zara stopped smiling. "And I didn't throw this in your face because I respected Aiden. I didn't say a word while you paraded around the funeral home. But now you've broken into my home, changed the locks, and are drinking from my mug like you own the place?" Nina's voice faltered. "You're bluffing." Pulled out my phone. "Want to see what the police think about trespassing?" Nina grabbed her handbag, called for Zara, and stormed past me, like a child being sent home from school. But I didn't move. I didn't even breathe until they were halfway down the driveway. Then I stood there, hand on the doorknob, staring at my own front door, and for the first time since Aiden died, I didn't feel powerless. They thought I was fragile, that I would break. They looked at the way I loved him and mistook it for weakness. But love isn't weakness, and silence doesn't mean surrender. That day I learned something I wish I had known sooner. When people underestimate you, they're handing you the upper hand, and it's up to you whether you use it with fire or with grace. That night I didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because the battle had only just begun. And I knew, deep down, they weren't finished. But neither was I. Even after they were gone, I didn't feel at home. Had changed the locks, lit a candle, washed the mugs they used. But everything still felt invaded. There's a certain kind of stillness that settles in after a confrontation. Not peace, not quiet. Just a silence that hums like a wound. That night I wandered through the house like a guest. I touched the banister Aiden used to fix every 6 months, ran my hand over the back of his chair at the kitchen table. I stood in the hallway where we used to dance, barefoot on Friday nights when we were too tired to go out. But the strangest part? I didn't cry. I think I had cried everything I had in me at the hospital. What was left now was something colder, harder, focused. I brewed a cup of coffee I didn't even want to drink. Habit, I guess. I added cinnamon, just the way Aiden liked it, even though I never did. The smell hit me like a punch to the heart, and there it was again, his absence, louder than any noise in the house. I sat down at the kitchen table. The chair across from me was empty. But in my mind, he was still there, tapping his fingers, humming off key, asking if we had enough milk for cereal tomorrow. It was cruel, how the mind holds on to rhythms the body no longer lives. But even in that moment, in that bottomless ache, a decision rose up like breath returning to tired lungs. I wasn't going to cry tonight. I wasn't going to let Nina steal this part too. My grief belonged to me, not to her twisted idea of family or inheritance or power. And so the next morning, just as the sky began to soften with light, I picked up the phone and called the funeral home. "Hi," I said, steady as I could. "This is Maya Walker. I need to make a few changes to the guest list." There was a pause. Of course. What changes? I swallowed hard. Aiden's mother and sister are no longer invited. Felt wrong at first, but then, again, nothing about any of this had felt right. Because grief doesn't mean tolerating disrespect, and mourning doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. We talk so much about how to be kind during death, how to be graceful in grief, but no one ever tells you it's okay to set boundaries, even when your heart is breaking. That morning, for the first time since Aiden passed, I felt like I had chosen me again. And that choice, that quiet, early, morning decision, changed everything. Later that day, I went into Aiden's office, a room I had avoided since the hospital, and what I found inside wasn't just paperwork. It was a truth he'd left behind, waiting for me to discover it, when I needed it most. Aiden's office was the smallest room in the house, tucked in the back near the laundry closet, barely wide enough to fit a desk and a chair. We used to joke that it felt more like a storage unit than a workspace. But Aiden loved it, said it helped him think. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to step inside. Every time I passed the door, I imagined him sitting in there, headphones on, coffee half finished, papers spread everywhere in that chaotic sea. Only he understood. But that afternoon, I opened the door, and the moment I stepped in, the air shifted. The air shifted. It smelled like him. Cologne, printer ink, and that citrus candle he always claimed helped him focus. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Stacks of unopened mail, a half-written to-do list, his favorite pen with a cap chewed off. Grief isn't just about absence. It's about the way presence lingers in objects long after the person is gone. I began sorting through drawers, not because I knew what I was looking for, just following a feeling. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was hope. And then I saw it. A thin manila folder tucked beneath a stack of loose papers, labeled in Aiden's handwriting, "Prenup. Do not discard." My stomach flipped. Aiden and I had never signed a prenup. We talked about it briefly when we got engaged, but it never happened. So why would he write that? Why hide it? I opened the folder slowly. Inside were several pages on legal letterhead, dated just a week after our wedding. Not a prenup, but a postnup. Name, his name, clauses, signatures, and one line, highlighted in yellow. In the event of my death, all jointly owned assets, including property, shall be transferred fully to my spouse Maya Walker, unless otherwise stated in a last will and testament. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. And then, behind the last page, folded neatly like a secret kept safe, was a handwritten note in his messy all-caps scrawl, in case Nina ever tries anything. You know, how she is. Keep this. I laughed, quiet, choked, half in disbelief. Of course he knew. Of course he prepared. Even in death, Aiden was trying to protect me. This man, who had once forgotten to renew his driver's license 3 years in a row, had written a legal document and hidden it like a time bomb, one meant to go off if his mother ever crossed the line. And now, that moment had come. Sitting there in that tiny office, with sunlight cutting across the desk and dust floating like snowflakes in the air, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until then. Wasn't alone. Even in his absence, Aiden had left me armor, and maybe that's what love really is. Not just flowers or whispered, "I love you," but the quiet ways we prepare each other for the storm, even if we're not there to see it. I held the papers to my chest like a shield, because Nina wasn't finished, but neither, it turns out, was Aiden. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it slowly, expecting trouble, and there she was, Nina. This time not with moving boxes, but with a lawyer and a plan to take everything away again. Before we move on, I want to pause here and ask you, the person listening right now, how would you feel if someone tried to erase your place in the life you built with the person you loved most? Have you ever experienced something similar, where grief was made harder by the actions of others? I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what does this part of the story bring up for you? Was it anger, sadness, maybe even a quiet kind of strength? Your voice matters. And you never know who needs to hear that they're not alone. All right, let's keep going. Because what Maya does next, it's the beginning of her quiet war. And trust me, you'll want to see how she fights back. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I had this feeling, not quite dread, not quite certainty, just that quiet inner voice that whispers, brace yourself. And I was right. There she was, Nina, standing on my front step, dressed in black again. This time, less mourning widow, more boardroom villain. Next to her stood a man in a gray suit, clipboard in hand and face unreadable. Maya, she said flatly. This is Mr. Grant, my family attorney. We're here to discuss next steps regarding Aiden's estate. I didn't open the door. Next steps? I asked through the screen. Nina straightened her shoulders like this was some formal negotiation. Aiden left no will, which means his assets fall under intestate law. As his mother and next of kin, I'm entitled to a share. The house, for instance, should be divided. I blinked at her. Lolly, you mean me? His wife? His legal spouse? Nina's mouth twitched. Just for a second. I'm so glad you came, I said. Saves me a trip. I stepped away and returned with the manila folder in one hand and the house deed in the other. I held them up, calm, steady, no theatrics. Would you like to read the part where it says, I inherit everything? Or should I let my attorney explain it to you in court? Mr. Grant reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. You'll get your copy when it comes through official channels, I said, and locked the screen door. Nina's face cracked, just slightly, but enough. She knew. She knew she had lost the upper hand. They turned, tight-lipped, and walked back to their car. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. 3 days later, I received a letter from the probate court. Nina had filed a formal petition contesting the postnuptial agreement. She was claiming Aiden wasn't mentally fit when he signed it, that I had coerced him, manipulated him in a moment of weakness. That was the moment this stopped being grief. It became war. I called Lena, my lawyer. Her voice, calm as ever, felt like a life raft in stormy water. She's throwing everything she can at the wall, Lena said. That doesn't mean it'll stick, but she's accusing me of lying, of controlling him. I know, I whispered, hands trembling. And it feels personal, because it is personal. But that's not how we fight, she replied. We don't scream, we don't show our anger. We let the paperwork speak. We let the facts breathe. And we let people like Nina show their true face when the truth doesn't serve them. And right then and there, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend what Aiden left me. I was going to defend what we built. Because sometimes love doesn't end with loss. Sometimes it demands a second fight. One you never thought you'd have to face. And this one, I wasn't going to fight with tears. I was going to fight with truth. But truth, I learned, doesn't always come easily, especially when the people who want to bury it are willing to twist anything to win. And the next message I got was from someone I never expected, dragging Aiden's past into the courtroom, one doubt at a time. Truth doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it shows up in whispers, in half-forgotten files, in memories you almost pushed away. A few days after Nina filed her petition, I got a message. It wasn't from my lawyer or the court. It was from Owen, Aiden's former business partner. Hey, I don't want to get involved, but Nina called me. She's asking for any emails or records that might prove Aiden wasn't mentally fit to sign that agreement. I told her I didn't have anything, but she's digging, just hard. My breath caught. Owen and Aiden hadn't worked together in over a year. Their split was peaceful, mostly brought on by Aiden's declining energy and his decision to step away from the business. But there was one day I remembered too clearly. Aiden had come home from a client meeting, pale and quiet. He couldn't remember where he parked, forgot the name of the investor he'd just met. I remember sitting next to him on the couch, rubbing his back while he shook his head and said, "It's probably just stress." But now that moment felt like a ticking clock. Nina had somehow found it, I stood frozen in the kitchen, holding my phone like it might explode. Because if she could prove or even suggest that Aiden was experiencing cognitive decline, the post-nup could be dismissed. And then I remembered something. One night, a few months before he died, Aiden mentioned going to a neurologist. Just to be safe, he'd said. I've been a little foggy. It's probably nothing. He didn't want me to come with him. Said it would only make it feel more serious at the time. I respected his space, trusted his instincts, but now that appointment might be the key to everything. I ran to his office again, this time with urgency. Tearing through every drawer, every envelope, receipts, contracts, birthday cards, nothing until I saw it. A small white envelope from St. Michael's Neurology Center, still sealed. My hand shook as I opened it. Dear Mr. Walker, following your recent cognitive assessment, we are pleased to inform you that your results fall within the normal range. No signs of early cognitive decline were detected. I sank to my knees. There it was. Proof. Not just that. Aiden had been thinking clearly when he signed that document, but that he'd worried enough to double-check. That he was the kind of man who planned quietly, gently, just in case. The kind of man Nina never truly knew. I pressed the letter to my chest and exhaled, like I hadn't in days. It's strange how paper can weigh less than air and yet feel like armor. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending the truth of who Aiden really was. A man who tried, who protected, who saw things coming, even when I didn't. And I would defend that truth with everything I had. Because people like Nina, they don't need facts. They need cracks. Small breakable doubts they can twist into their own stories. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to Aiden, not to me, and not to what we built. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm front. Gray skies, heavy air, and a room full of people pretending to be composed. But the moment I stepped inside that courtroom, holding every piece of paper Aiden had left me, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because this time, the fight wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what I still had, the strength to protect. The morning of the hearing came with a gray sky and a chill in the air. The kind of day that makes you feel like even the trees are holding their breath. I stood at the door, a briefcase in my hand, Aiden's post-nup, the neurologist's letter, and every other piece of evidence stacked in neat folders. My armor. Nina was already inside, sitting with Mr. Grant. Their lawyerly expressions never wavered, but I could feel the tension. They knew, deep down, they had underestimated me. The judge called the room to order and I took my seat, head high, no longer shaking in my boots. When it was my turn, I stood, held up the papers, and explained, calmly, clearly, how Aiden had planned ahead, had thought of everything, and when I finished, the courtroom fell silent. Nina's face was a mask of tight control, but I saw it. A flicker of fear in her eyes. The facts spoke for themselves. There was no wiggle room. The post-nup stood. The truth was undeniable. Nina's lawyer tried to argue, to twist the facts, but it was too late. The truth had already been laid bare. The judge ruled in my favor, and I walked out of that courtroom not with a sense of triumph, but with peace. Because in that moment, I knew Aiden had been right. Even in death, he had done everything he could to protect me. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic declarations, but the quiet, constant preparation for the storms we never see coming. I left the courthouse, Aiden's memory wrapped around me like a shield, and Nina, her plans thwarted, was left to face the truth that had always been there. Weather is holding its breath. I stood outside the courthouse in a simple black dress, holding a folder filled with everything Aiden left behind, the notarized post-nup and the letter from his neurologist. Lena, my lawyer, met me on the steps, calm, composed, just like always. Ready? She asked. I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. Inside, Nina was already seated in the front row with Mr. Grant, her attorney. She wore a lace-trimmed black veil like she was auditioning for a tragic opera. Next to her sat Zara, eyes lowered, playing the part of the grieving daughter. They didn't look at me, but I wasn't here for them. I was here for Aiden, for the life we built, for the love they tried to erase. The hearing wasn't long. Lena presented the documents, laid them out clearly, step by step, paper by paper. Our story told in signatures, stamps, and legal logic. When Mr. Grant tried to argue mental incompetence, Lena didn't flinch. She simply held up the neurologist's letter and said, "Do you have any documentation to support your claim?" He didn't. Not one shred of medical evidence, just hearsay, an insinuation. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, looked unimpressed. She asked a few questions, clarified the timeline, and then leaned back in her chair. "I see no legal basis to dispute the property transfer," she said firmly. "This house and all jointly owned assets legally belong to Mrs. Maya Walker. Case dismissed." Just like that, it was over. Or at least it should have been. As I walked out of the courtroom, files tucked under my arm, I felt something lift off my chest. No joy. Not relief exactly, but vindication. Nina followed me into the hallway, her voice low and sharp. "You may have won the house, but you'll never erase me. I'm his mother." I turned to face her, and with every ounce of calm I had left, I said, "I didn't erase you. You did that yourself." She blinked, caught off guard. Her mask cracked, and I added, without flinching, "Aiden's funeral is tomorrow. You're not invited." Her mouth fell open. "You can't keep me from my own son's funeral." But I held her gaze. I already did. And then I turned and walked away. Here's the thing. When people show you who they are, believe them. But when they show you who you are, don't. Let them be the author of your story. The next day, I stood at the front of a small chapel filled with friends and quiet grief. And just as the service was about to begin, I saw them. Two familiar silhouettes slipping into the back row. Nina and Zara. They weren't on the list, but they came anyway. And the next day, I stood in the chapel just before noon, wearing the same black dress I had worn to court. The air was filled with quiet murmurs and the soft rustle of tissues. Aiden's picture rested on a wooden easel near the altar, surrounded by his favorite wildflowers, daisies and bluebells, picked fresh that morning from the edge of the garden. People came, colleagues, neighbors, old friends. They offered hugs, soft words, quiet stories I hadn't heard before. "He always talked about you," one woman whispered, pressing my hand. "You were his anchor. The calm he never knew he needed." I nodded, barely able to speak. By 11:45, every seat in the room was filled, except for two in the very back. That's when I saw them. Nina and Zara slipping in quietly, as if they could blend into the grief they had never earned. My pulse spiked. I felt Lena beside me, her hand gently brushing my arm. "Do you want me to handle it?" she asked, voice low. I shook my head. "No, I'll do it." I walked slowly down the aisle, every eye turning toward me. Not out of curiosity, but respect. They knew this wasn't just a funeral. It was a final line I was drawing. In love, in truth, in memory. Nina looked up as I approached, defiant. I leaned in and whispered, calm and controlled, "You're not supposed to be here." She didn't move. "I'm not leaving," she whispered back. I nodded. "Then I will. I'll walk out right now and take the minister with me. We'll do this in a park, in my backyard, anywhere but here, because I won't let you sit through this and pretend to mourn the man you spent your life controlling." For a moment, she didn't blink, but then something unexpected happened. Zara touched her mother's arm and whispered, "Mom, let's go." Nina turned, stunned. Her daughter wouldn't meet her eyes. After a long pause, Nina rose, silently seething, and followed Zara out. The door clicked closed behind them, and with that, the weight lifted. I walked back to the front, stood beside Aiden's picture, and faced the people who truly mattered. The minister began to speak, his voice gentle and grounded, and I said goodbye to the man I loved, not in bitterness, not in pain, but in peace. because this wasn't about revenge anymore. Never really was. It was about justice, about protecting the quiet love we had built, brick by brick, and honoring it fully, without interruption, without intrusion, without anyone rewriting the ending for me. You don't have to scream to reclaim your space. Sometimes the strongest boundary is a door you choose not to open. The day after the funeral, the house was still and quiet again, but it wasn't haunted anymore. And as I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty spot beside me, I realized some endings make space for something unexpected to grow. And in Aiden's name, in Aiden's memory, that's exactly what I was about to do. I knew if I didn't act, I'd be surrendering the one moment that truly mattered. The day after the funeral, the house was silent, not empty, just quiet in a way that didn't feel haunted anymore. It was the first time I'd stood in our bedroom and not expected to hear Aiden humming off key from the kitchen. The first time I looked at the empty spot beside me and didn't feel crushed by it, just aware. I sat at the edge of the bed, still, in black, holding the small box of his things I hadn't been able to touch until now. His watch, an old concert ticket stub, and a seed catalog with dog-eared pages. That catalog caught me off guard because Aiden had talked about building a garden for years. Not just flowers, he used to say, but vegetables too. Something real, something that grows. I always smiled, always said, maybe next season. But next season never came for him, so I made a decision. I went into the backyard, the one we'd always said we'd fix up, but never quite did. I pulled on gloves, grabbed a shovel, and I started to dig. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't graceful. It was sweat and dirt under my nails and blisters I didn't know I had in me. But it was mine, and it was his. Every morning before work, I'd spend 20 minutes out there, pulling weeds, turning soil, planting seeds, wildflowers, tomatoes, lavender, and mint. Things that reminded me of calm, of him, of possibility. 1. Morning after a hard rain, I stepped out and saw the first signs of life. Tiny green shoots breaking through the soil, reaching for the sun like they already knew where to go. I knelt beside them, hands muddy, and cried for the first time in weeks. Not because I was broken, but because I was growing too. Then one afternoon, I found another envelope tucked under the welcome mat. No stamp, no address, just 6 typed words. Bold and bitter. This house will always be mine. Nina. I laughed, not bitterly, not angrily, just softly. I took the letter, walked out into the yard, and pressed it deep into the soil beneath the marigolds, Aiden's favorite. That was the last time she ever tried to reach me. And in a way, I was thankful, because it reminded me of something simple. You don't have to silence every voice trying to pull you back into the past. You just have to stop letting them take root. Seasons passed. The house began to breathe again. I painted the guest room, changed the curtains, started keeping fresh herbs. In the kitchen window. It wasn't about moving on from Aiden. It was about moving forward with him, quietly, gently, in the soil, in the sun, in every bloom that rose from the ground we once called ours. And one evening, standing barefoot in the garden, with dirt on my palms and light on my face, I realized something. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for peace, not for closure, not for Nina's approval. I had everything I needed. Love, memory, and a future I was no longer afraid to plant with my own hands. Some battles are won with words, others with silence, and some with a single seed, buried deep that says, I'm still here. Thank you so much for staying with me through this story. If there's one thing we can take away from Maya's journey, it's this. Grief doesn't always come alone. Sometimes it arrives hand in hand with betrayal, silence, and injustice. But even in the darkest chapters, we still get to choose who we become. Maya didn't fight with rage. She fought with truth, with grace, and with quiet strength. And in doing so, she reclaimed not just her home, but her voice. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Did it remind you of something you've lived through or someone you know? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might help someone else feel seen. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories just like this one. Until next time, take care of your heart and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong.